I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And I've got some big stuff for you in this video. Make it to the end, you'll be glad you did. I alluded in a video I did yesterday, if y'all seen the part, where I said at the end that I had some new insights after reviewing all the Moscow PD documents one more time. And I believe I found some very interesting things when I did that. And I know the video that I did yesterday was a letdown to a lot of people when it comes to the what did Maddie tell Adam thing. And I know a lot of people were upset and wish that law enforcement would have asked that question and questioned law enforcement for not doing it. And I get your frustration on that. We'd all really like to know what Adam told, or what Maddie told Adam. Now, a lot of people, I'm sure, disagreed with my interpretation of the events because I truly believe it was probably just something youngsters are, talking about. I don't believe it had anything to do with trafficking. I don't believe it had anything to do with anything involved in the Idaho 4 case, and I never have. So when I see those statements, it just validates it for me. A lot of people, get upset with it. And I think that's where I get kind of sideways with a lot of people in this particular genre of the true crime community, especially other creators, because I have never believed and continue not to believe. I don't think there's any evidence that shows any Jack D, his buddies, frats involvements in this crime whatsoever. I think that's an ancillary thing. And a lot of people take issue with me on that. And I understand. And a lot of other creators really take issue with me on that because for some reason they feel like that when I say the things I'm saying right now, it somehow impacts their ability to create content. And what I say to that always goes back to the same thing. If the content you're creating is compelling enough for people to want to see it, then what I say shouldn't matter. But when I think of Jack D and the frats and all of that stuff, this is what comes to my mind every time.
Please welcome to the stage, Jack D and the Frets.
Now, and I know the thing that has to be answered after that, not just what did you tell Adam, Maddie? It was what everybody believes they heard after that, which is these guys are going to get you for that, Maddie, or they're going to get you for that, Maddie, or whatever it is that people hear when they listen to that part. You see, I'll just tell you right now, I don't hear that. What I hear is clearly, let's get you some grub, Maddie. That's what I hear when I listen to, they're going to get you for this, Maddie. I don't hear that at all. I hear, let's get you some grub, Maddie. That's what I hear Jack Showalter say. So when I see things like that, I just check it off my list because I didn't believe it had any application to this case anyways. And if it does and I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. There'll be plenty of people out there that'll dive in deeper on that. And I believe they'll just go in circles like they have been for almost 3 years. Me, on the other hand, I'm going through and I'm trying to pick out what really happened in this case and looking for logical facts and trying to determine what happened in this investigation. And yes, I do believe I have a pretty clear understanding of what happened in the investigation into the case. Do I agree with everything that happened in the investigation? Absolutely not. But it is becoming more and more clear every day what their real investigation into this case was. And I believe you really have to understand that before you can understand where they really got it wrong. Now, in my humble opinion, there was a major cover-up, which really confuses the matters even more. And I believe there was a cover-up around what happened after the atrocity, the 911 call, the roommate situation, and going right up into the entire trial against Brian Kohberger that has over 1,200 sealed documents. I believe there's been a lot of things that's covered up, misdirection, red herrings, and it really confuses the issue. So what I try to do is bring clarity to the subject, and that's what I'm going to try to do in this video. And when I say hold on to your hats, folks, I mean hold on to your hats, because I'm going to do my best to show you what I believe the evidence is to prove the investigation into this case, right down to how they got Brian Kohberger's name and how they even associated him to the crime. Well, we know they associated him to the crime because he owned a white Hyundai Elantra, even though it was not the right model year. And there is so much documentation now that has been released. It really makes me believe that this thing is at some point going to go to trial. Such as this document from Dustin Blaker that he had written on February 22nd, 2023, almost 2 months after Kohberger was arrested. And he stated that a few weeks after November 13th, certainly not November the 26th, a few weeks would be after that. I was at work when I was asked by MT analysts with the FBI if we had any way to run our records to see if we had any license plates for a white Hyundai Elantra, year models 2011 to 2013. So they certainly weren't looking outside of those year models at least a few weeks after the atrocity on King Road, according to Dustin Blaker. And then to make it even more relevant, Dustin Blaker on July 21st, 2023, wrote this report. And it states that from November 25th, 2022, all the way to December 12th, 2022, he had gathered information from other police agencies around Moscow in reference to any 2012 to 2013 Hyundai Elantras. So not only were they still looking on December the 12th for model years that were not Brian Kohberger's, they had even apparently dialed it down, not even to 11 to 13, but from 12 to 13. So any type of testimony regarding when they changed the Hyundai Elantra over to 14 to 16 after they got Brian Kohberger's name, I believe in a trial would be absolutely undeniably ridiculous to even try to claim it. And I'm really confident in that fact. And once again, I believe it all goes back to the motion to continue that Ann Taylor filed. And in that motion to continue, I covered it in detail for you. Ann Taylor made two major points. One was the reason to continue the case was due to the massive mainstream moron media exposing things in this case and creating a media stir that would eliminate any possibility of a fair trial. And it wasn't just the things that were leaked, as she went on to point out. It was the one-sided takes that all the opinion people had around the information that was released that was having the big impact. And the judge's response was, well, with the media onslaught on this case, I don't think putting it off is going to matter whatsoever. Well, that's where I believe the defense disagreed with the judge and where I disagree with him as well, because we can already see that what time has done has lowered the temperature on this thing. And maybe a plea deal at the time was the only thing that was going to have that kind of impact to lower the temperature and get people's eyes off of it. That's part one. Part two is the fact that there was a investigation into the leakers into the case, and the defense clearly lined out that they wanted that investigation to be completed because it could eliminate potential state witnesses from being able to even testify in the case due to their breaking of the non-dissemination order. A special investigator has been assigned, and that investigation is ongoing. It is my firm belief that once that investigation is completed, then we're going to see a move to get this thing to trial. And it seems to, by doing it that way, as long as they can get it to trial. And I believe they must have had some type of plan that would allow them to confidently say, we'll get it to trial at a later date. And then you have the temperature that would be brought down significantly. And then with all the released information, maybe new eyes, if this thing does go to trial, we'll get a little bit different coverage. And so in the meantime, I just want to try to expose as much as I can, just in case that happens. I may be totally wrong and they may never try even to get this thing to trial, but I believe that they will. And I believe the documents that are being held up by the judge, I believe it's anticipation of what I just described. So then we also know that Ann Taylor and defense team was supposed to meet with Brian Kohberger, I believe last week, to discuss some of the restitution matters in the case. So there's some things on the back burner that makes me think this thing is far from over. So anyway, as I go through this video though, what I'm going to attempt to do in this video is some pretty major things. It's going to be a lot of detail. I've worked hard putting this one together for you. So if you can make it to the end, I assure you, you will learn things that you did not know in this case. And to understand the real case, I've said this many times, you've got to be able to separate the fact from the fiction. Because I believe, undoubtedly, the real case has key players and it has 3 key dates around those key players. November the 23rd, 2022, December 14th, 2022, and December 19th, 2022. We know on the 23rd, that's when they actually identify and bring in Molly, the DoorDash driver. They identify Mowich, Farley in custody where he can talk. December 14th was when they unalive Kopaka. Just 5 days later is when the FBI provides Brian Kohberger's name as a tip. But to further back this up, let's review the investigation that starts with Molly. Because when we look at this case, and something as critical as the DoorDash driver making the DoorDash delivery, for you to understand Molly played a role in this atrocity, you have to understand the investigation into the case that led them to even know about Molly. Because Molly is not an innocent bystander in this, I assure you.
Get in the car!
Search my truck.
And the investigation that led to Molly started on November 16th, 2022. And that's when the warrants were issued for all of the tower dumps for telephones that were in the area during the time of the atrocity. And to determine that, we can simply just follow the documentation. Mowry wrote the report on November 17th. But on November 16th, he applied for and was granted the following warrants for the cell phone providers serving the area around 1122 Kings Road in Moscow. And they got AT&T for a tower dump of all the records. They also wanted the time in advance for records of all the phones in the area. And they got Verizon, and they wanted a tower dump for all the records in the area. T-Mobile, tower dump for all the records in the area. Inland Cellular, tower dump, all the records in the area. So they wanted all the phones in the area so they could identify who they thought was possibly involved in this crime. So again, November 16th, they got the tower dump around the King Road residence for phones in the area. That led them to the next warrant that was issued on November 18th. And that warrant was issued for a Google geofence warrant, which means they took all the phones in the area and now they were going to narrow it down by using Google's geofence of the same area. And that's backed up by this document, written again by Lawrence Mowry. This time he's written this one on December 5th, but it's discussing what happened on November the 18th. He applied for and was granted a geofence warrant for any data associated with anonymized information located within the following longitude, latitude points. Now, we can just guess that if the King Road neighborhood or King Road house is right here, they went to 4 points, point 1, 2, 3, and 4, and geofenced all of the traffic in this area. And on November 18th at approximately 23:30, the warrant was served. November 20th, Special Agent Balance of the FBI was noticed that the data was returned. And based on the information received and in correlation with cell tower records, so they took the geofence from Google and all the cell tower records, and by using those, they pinpointed 2 users. 2 of the anonymous identifiers were found to be of interest. Those identifiers, and they've got them blocked out here. But then on November 20th, he applied and was granted a warrant for any data associated with these 2 identifiers, including subscriber information. Balance with the FBI assisted in production and service of the warrant. On November 20th, a warrant was served by email to Google. And then on November 20th, Special Agent Balance received notice that the data requested pursuant to the warrant was available. Now, where did that lead them? So once again, November 16th, warrant issued for the tower dump. November 18th, warrant issued for the Google geofence. And then on November 20th, they had 2 identifiers found. November 22nd, a PIN warrant is issued and Molly is identified. When they say PIN, that's the trap and trace that they issued to try to identify those identifiers. One of them was identified as Molly. And that can be backed up with this police report by, again, Lawrence Mowry, written on December 6th. And he's discussing what happened, though, on November 22nd, 2022, where he applied for and was granted a PIN warrant for any data associated with the phone number of Molly McMetherton, which was linked to a possible witness, Molly McMetherton. And on November 22nd, the warrant was served. On November 22nd, Special Agent Balance received the notice that the data was back. And what happened from there? McMetherton was subsequently identified, located, and interviewed as a witness by Corporal Brett Payne. So there can be no mistake about Molly. She delivered, according to law enforcement, a DoorDash delivery right at the time of the atrocity. And almost 10 days later, she had not reported to law enforcement that she was in the area during the time. They had to go through all of this to identify Molly and bring her in as a witness. So there's no mistaking how critical Molly is, not only in their investigation, but also to what really happened. So following the timeline right along, just like we heard in the warrant from Mowry, once they identified and located Molly, she was brought in for an interview and interviewed on November 23rd, 2022 by Detective Brett Payne, lead investigator in the case. And we have the record for that as well. And you can see this is written by Brett Payne. He waited till January 10th to write this report, but he refers back to November 23rd when they brought in Molly McMetherton to the Moscow Police Department to get her official statement. So I think you would agree the obvious first leg of the actual investigation was from the time of the atrocity all the way up to when they identified and brought in Molly on November 23rd. Then the second leg of the investigation started after that because a lot of things happened on November 23rd, 2022. And we know the second leg of the investigation went all the way until December 6, 2022, because that is the first date that Mowry actually files for a warrant for DoorDash, which we can see in this report written by Mowry on December 12th, but he's referencing December 6th, the DoorDash warrant, where he applied and was granted a warrant for all the information in DoorDash's possession related to the sales, deliveries, purchases, and or transactions made to 1122 King Road in Moscow for the period of January 1st to present. And then on December 6th, the warrant was served. December 7th, they got the warrant back. Now, why did he wait from November 23rd till December 6th for that warrant? Because I believe their investigation was focused on the next aspect during that time. That's a 13-day window right there where other things were investigated. And that's where you get into the Mowich angle. Because on November 15th, they got access to Linda Lane footage in the case. And we know that because of this report written by Danny Vargas on January 25th, 2023. But she was referencing what happened on December 15th, 2022, where she called the property owner for Linda Lane and asked about video footage he has on the property. He stated he did have a video and later sent me an email with a direct login to his camera system, so the videos could be viewed for any time frame. Details of the email are below. And when you look at this, below is a link to a Google Drive with footage from our cameras at either 1320 or 1330 Linda Lane or both. He uploaded videos from two cameras from 2 o'clock through 6 o'clock on November 13th. One camera shows the parking lot of 1330 Linda Lane, including a little bit of the parking lot from the Queen Road apartments below. The other camera covers the street of Linda Lane looking towards Taylor and Blake. And it doesn't tell us in this exactly when he sent the email to Vargas for her to view those things. I do think it's interesting, though, that he references the time that he sent was only from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Is that the only real time in the Linda Lane videos? But that was on November 15th when she contacted him. And when he sent the email, we don't really know, but we know it was Vargas. And we can follow what we knew happened next with Vargas in those videos. Because between November 15th and November 23rd, 2022, through those Linda Lane videos, Vargas identifies Gun Rack Guy in the video. And while the exact date of that is still a little bit unclear, we know in this police report by Brett Payne, where the narrative starts on November 23rd, but he begins the narrative on November 15th and ends it on November 23rd. So sometime during that time period is when Detective Vargas is viewing the Linda Lane footage, and she notices footage of a figure at 3:50 a.m., and that figure is walking directly towards the King Road residence during that time frame at 3:50. He's clad in dark clothing, and this almost exactly gets inserted into the probable cause affidavit. So we can assume, based on the fact that the next day Payne is trying to get a warrant for what he believes is an apartment that person came out of incorrectly, because that person came out of a car. But he believed he came out of an apartment, so he's getting a warrant for those apartments on November 23rd, which leads me to believe that this footage is being reviewed by Vargas and Payne on November 22nd, 2022. We also know on November 22nd, 2022, that is the day they pick up Farley up in Spokane. As we see from this Spokane police report, for the fugitive that was arrested actually at 7:34 p.m. on South State Street in Spokane on 2 fugitive warrants. Then on November 23rd, 2022, the day after they, I believe, identify Gun Rack Guy in the Linda Lane video, they get Mowich's DNA from the coroner. And we can see that on November 23rd, 2022, DNA retrieved from the Spokane County Medical Examiner's Office for Mowich. The swabs were collected by pathologist Sean Ricardo during Mowich's autopsy. And due to Mowich's unusual behavior leading up to his death, Ricardo and his staff felt it necessary to secure his DNA sample and provide it for the Moscow investigators. It was immediately transported from Spokane and delivered to the Moscow Police Department evidence staff on November 23rd, 2022. So from November 23rd, 2022, all the way through December 6th, that is 13 days. And I believe they used that 13 days to utilize their snitches and firmly identify Mowich as one of the perpetrators in the case. And we'll continue from there, because then another 8 days of investigating lapse until Brent Kopacka is unalived by law enforcement, as we all believe they were serving an arrest warrant, because that's what they said in their body cam video. And never think Kopacka wasn't a suspect in the case, because as you can see with this narrative from this AL person, and they say during my initial phone call, this is Brett Payne, during his initial phone call with AL, he told me he was painting the apartment of Brent Kopacka, the previous tenant, and person named in tips during the initial investigation. Brent Kopacka was named in tips during the initial investigation. We've never seen those tips. And he stated he could see a knife blade in the gutter of the building from the apartment window. I requested WSUPD respond and collect the item, which they later did. The blade is serrated. Cooking style knife with the handle broken off. The blade portion was approximately 8 inches long and 2 inches wide per the WSU officer who collected it. Based off this description and the condition of the knife, I do not believe it matched the wounds found on either victim. However, I will still collect the knife from WSUPD as soon as possible in order to properly analyze the item. Yeah, you can bet they wanted to analyze that item from the initial investigation and the tips as this person named. What happened to that knife?
It's weird. I mean, it's not covered in blood anymore.
Now, it was another 5 days between the time that they unalived Kopacka and December 19th, when they provided the tip to Moscow PD from the FBI saying Kohberger's name was found in an IgG experiment, right? The magical tree experiment. The FBI gives them Kohberger's name. So what happened during this 5-day window? Anything of interest that may contradict this tree experiment? Well, we know that on December 14th, the day that Kopacka's unalived, something I may have gotten wrong happened. And in this case, we see all the police reports for cell phones that law enforcement collected so that they could examine. There was a big gap between all of the boyfriends and frat boys on their phones that they collected all the way up until December 14th, when out of nowhere, they collected somebody's phone to do an extraction on. Originally, I thought this could have been Kara Kernodle because the initials are CK. But is there a C. Kopacka that could have signed off on the investigators doing a extraction of Kopacka's phone? Let's look at that report one more time. Maybe I was incorrect. You can see and remember the dates always matter. This report is listed as December 20th by Lawrence Mowry, but keep in mind he's writing this report on December the 19th, 2022. Now, that is a key date. That is when supposedly the FBI provided Brian Kohberger's name as a tip from the IgG. But he's actually writing this report on the day that they supposedly got Brian Kohberger's name, And he's referencing what he did on December 14th. So this is more than a little bit suspicious as far as dates, in my opinion. But when we read this report, it says, I was requested to complete a forensic extraction on an iPhone provided by, and it says CK. Now, I thought this was Kara Kernodle. But does Kopaka have a relative with the first name initial C that could have signed off on them downloading his phone? I think it's quite possible. And it just happens to be on the date that they unalived Kopaka, so I think it's kind of likely. And let's just say that this says Kopaka. Kopaka signed a consent to search form for the device, and it was provided to me by FBI Special Agent Travis Shirley. The phone was powered on, placed in the airport mode, protected any potential evidence on the phone from being removed or remotely deleted. He took photos of the device and attached them to the case file. And then he returned the phone to this K person. I believe the dates line up with this is likely Kopaka's phone. But of course, because of these stupid blocks, we can't be for certain. But it certainly seems likely. Does Kopaka have a close relative with the first initial C that could have signed off on this? I don't know. Somebody should verify that for me. But what happened next, I think, tells the story. Because sticking with this same mindset of they haven't taken anybody's phones for a long time up until this possible Kopaka extraction, which leads me to the next odd thing that law enforcement did, and that was on December 15th, 2022. They get another phone and somebody else to sign off on it being extracted. And it is a questioned individual. I don't know where this one came up in this investigation before this date, which leads me to believe that whatever they extracted from Kopaka's phone led them to wanting to know what was on this phone that they extracted information from on December 15th. And then from there, I believe Koberger's contact information was garnered. And just 4 days later, the FBI provides a tip that says Brian Koberger was the result of a tree experiment. What happened on December 15th with this phone? You can see, and once again, it all lines up with the Kopaka phone extraction. Lawrence Mowry on December 20th is actually talking about a report that he put together on December 19th. Just the same as the previous phone extraction, but this time he's talking about on December 15th, one day after that phone was extracted. And it says, I was requested to complete a forensic extraction on a Samsung cell phone provided by LB. B signed a consent to search form for the device, and it was provided to me by ISP Detective Hugh Powell. The form has been uploaded to the case file. And he goes through to discuss how he did the same thing with this phone as he did with possibly the Kopaka phone. So the real question then is, whose phone does this one belong to? And who is this LB with a short name, LB? That looks to me like 4 letters. B and 5 letters. Yeah, it lines up. 4 letters and 5 letters, L and B. Who is that? I believe this is what the evidence tells us. On December 14th, law enforcement shoots Kopaka. They get his phone. They get permission to extract it from one of his relatives. They extract it. It leads them to their next step, and then they get somebody to sign off on extracting Mawich's phone. And the person that they get to sign off, this LB, is, in my humble opinion, Nicholas Mawich's fiance. As you see in his obituary, is listed as Lena Black. Lena Black signs off on phone to be searched. And then from there, they find Koberger's information. They figure out he drives a white Elantra, and then they start trying to build a case from there. But they don't want to talk about Kopaka and Mowich, so they come up with this tree experiment that they had been working on to name Koberger as the suspect. Now, that's for you to decide, though. December 19th, just 4 days later, Koberger's named as a suspect by the FBI. They won't admit to an IGG at this point, and they never want to admit to an IGG until the case is almost completed 2.5 years later. But did they get Koberger's name from the IGG, or was he a contact in Nicholas Mawich's phone? I vote B myself, but here's the next piece of evidence, and really the final piece of evidence between, would Koberger even know Mawich? Is there any evidence of that? Well, when we look deeper into what Koberger's studies were, we know that he was really big into the Reddit prison surveys. And due to the police report that shows the conversations he was having with actual people in prison, and the fact that Mawich was in prison during the time he was having those conversations, it would be an opportunity for Koberger to actually have contact with Mawich prior to this. And again, when we go to this police report written by Mowry, as he discusses the Reddit surveys, well, we know based on this that they found Koberger's account, and that was active from September 24th, 2021, and it was active from Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. And in the report, it shows that Koberger, as you can see in these comments, was having conversations, deep conversations with people in prison. And he had been doing that for some time. So this, we know, are part of Koberger's studies, but it would be an opportunity to build a relationship with somebody in the penitentiary at the time. Now, Koberger arrives in Pullman in June of 2022. That just happens to be, I think, about 11 days after Mawich is discharged from the Idaho Maximum Security Institution on June 12th, where he had been for 3.5 years. Now, the last thing that I will point to is in the Koberger witness statements. And when I go through and I look at all of the witness statements of people talking about their interactions with Brian Koberger, most of them sickens me because it's their opinion of his mannerisms, and it seems like a bunch of BS, as I'll show you right here. You can see how I even put my notes in these, like bogus WSU tips. My contact with Koberger was, he was weird and all this. And you got like Koberger's lazy professor mad because Koberger kept him late in class, asking him questions all the time. Another Brian Koberger student hater. Well, yeah, he was weird and, he scared me, all of that. But I find this one here to be just a little bit different. And when these reports first came out and I read this, what came to my mind, and I never reported on it, because what came to my mind was, this looks like Koberger to me is a Fed, and he's talking to another Fed. But when I went back and read it this last time, it hit me like a ton of bricks, about 3 words in this witness statement. And you can see this witness statement is taken by Danny Vargas, and it's dated January 10th, 2023. And it's discussing an interview they did with Brian Koberger's neighbor on December 30th. And it says, at approximately 6:30 hours, I stood by while a search warrant was served at the residence of Brian Koberger. While on scene, one of the neighbors who lived in the same building stated her husband returned home and he might have additional information to add regarding Brian. And he had been interviewed earlier in the day by several FBI agents prior to returning home. And Detective Mowry and I met with some of them in their apartment. I recorded the conversation with my phone and informed them I would be recording our conversation, which they were fine with. They said that she had been speaking with somebody about the question she was asked, one question being if she had ever seen Brian with anyone else. And they told me they did remember a time when they returned home and said they saw Brian sitting on the stairs. leading up to his apartment next to a male. And they described the male as having, and this is what hit me like a ton of bricks when I read it the second time. They described the male as having light brown skin. Not a white guy, but a guy with light brown skin. A sleeve tattoo on his left arm. He was wearing a sleeveless shirt and shorts. He said the male was riding a dark color, blue or black Harley type motorcycle. And he said the motorcycle was not a sport bike. It was very loud. And he said that they both noticed Brian and the male talking, but said as they got closer to both Brian and the male, they stopped talking and looked at him. And they said Brian acknowledged them and asked how it was going. They said it seemed as if Brian was acting overly nice. And they said when they walked away to their apartment, Brian and the male were still silent and did not continue their conversation. They said he saw the male get up, heard the motorcycle start, but not see him drive off. And they said this was the only time they ever saw this person or saw or heard the motorcycle. And then they go on to say Brian seemed like a quiet person. They remember meeting Brian's dad, and when Brian moved in, they said Brian's dad was very talkative. They said Brian's car was always clean and neat, even on rainy days. They said Brian would often park his car right in front of their bedroom window, and they would notice if the headlights when he came and went. And they did not notice when and if Brian changed the plates on his vehicle. They looked through his phone and thought on the night of the unalivings, he probably went to bed around midnight. He didn't remember seeing lights from Brian's car or knowing if Brian was home or not. He mentioned on another occasion seeing Brian return home around 1 o'clock and said he was wearing dark clothing, had on a dark colored backpack. And when they said hi to him, he seemed pretty short with them. He did not remember what day this occurred, but said it was not the night of the unalivings. And she said she worked late hours often and would also see Brian returning home around the same time she would, around 1 to 2 o'clock. We thanked them and ended our conversation. But until I read this again and I seen that this person with sleeve tattoos and a Harley type motorcycle, they're describing somebody pretty rough. And when they said light brown skin, my mind immediately went where you would probably expect it to go. He was sitting there likely talking with Mowat, y'all. This is where people will freak out and say, oh God, Pop's saying Kohberger's guilty. And I couldn't be saying anything further from that. I think it's actually possibly an exciting thing because here's what you have to understand. Here's what I believe. When you go back to the start of this thing, when I say things like, I believe Gunderson planted that knife sheath, I don't believe Gunderson planted the knife sheath because he was setting up Brian Kohberger. I don't believe he was planting the knife sheath with anybody's DNA on it. I believe he was just planting the knife sheath because that's what an officer would do in that situation if he wasn't on the level, knowing that down the road they were going to need to secure a conviction on somebody. That's how they set that up. The DNA and all that came later. Now, when I say that Mowry's in these interviews and he's leading these witnesses down a path, it's not because they already have the whole case mapped out. I believe he's leading the witnesses down a path that they could use later to gain a conviction. So it's little things that those law enforcement officers, I believe, did in the beginning were just setting up scenarios for whoever they were going to stick on this case. They were going to make sure they got a conviction. And that's what older, experienced, not so on the level officers will do in a lot of cases if you look into it. But as this thing got further down the line and they decided to add the DNA aspect in there and claim a DNA match to Kohberger, well, that creates a whole new challenge to a defense team. So if this does go to trial, trying to say that it's just a random event of his DNA ending up on the knife sheath isn't probably going to convince many juries that that wasn't Brian Kohberger in that car, even though we know that wasn't Brian Kohberger in that car. But being able to actually connect Kohberger to one of the assailants then gives the opportunity for one of the assailants to have placed Kohberger's knife sheath at the scene, which is a strong defense. A lot stronger than a cop planted it, I assure you. So having that connection, even though that I don't believe the assailants planted the knife sheath, I believe the assailants did other things that led to Brian Kohberger. And I believe some of those talking mouths led to Brian Kohberger as well. And being able to make that connection to that setup, I believe will be key. I'm going to leave you some time to think about this one. Probably won't do one tomorrow because I just gave you a lot. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.
Until I walk away.